American pride, American Puros. That's something you don't hear about when we talk about cigars too often, an American Puro. But there is still a lot of American pride into this American Puro. Happy 4th of July to all of you watching this. Happy belated 4th of July, as today it is the observed day for the 4th of July since it fell on a Sunday. And may God bless America and its troops, because I truly believe that this is a blessed nation. I love America, and I'm hoping to love this cigar. This is the American by J.C. Newman, and it is an American Puro. Something that is very rare. Why is it rare? Well, we're going to get to that. But first, we're going to touch base with this particular cigar. Now, this cigar, I didn't memorize any of the specs for it because I actually wanted to read what the company had to say about this. As you can see, it's got a beautiful band on it. It's even got, yes, that is not the Cuban flag. That is the Puerto Rican flag on it. See if we can get it where it's not too cloudy there, too blurry. Well, we're going to get to touch base on that as well. I did send them an email trying to find out the inspiration behind the band. I know there was a lot of thought process into every aspect of this cigar, but I don't know yet, as they haven't replied to the email yet, but I'm sure they will. Jeff B. and J.C. Newman, they both respond to emails very well. So let's touch base with the American. The American was the first cigar brand rolled in J.C. Newman's historic El Reloj factory when it opened in 1910 in Ybor City, Florida. A century later, the American has been reintroduced as a 100% American cigar. Once again hand-rolled in El Reloj. This brand honors America's cigar tradition by rolling world-class cigars in America using the finest American-grown, aged heirloom tobaccos. From the tobacco to cigar molds to the wood cabinet boxes, everything is proudly grown and made in America. So the description on the website, this is sold, believe it's not an exclusive to Corona cigars. You can find it at a few different websites. The American is a flavorful, medium-bodied luxury cigar. As an American Puro, it has a unique taste unlike any other cigar in the world. Its distinctive earthy flavors are due to soils and climate of the Florida Sun-Grown Farm, where the American's exclusive Florida Sun-Grown wrapper is grown, and the cigar's blend of aged Connecticut and Pennsylvania tobaccos. The American is handcrafted in 4 sizes and packaged in classic wooden cabinets of 10 cigars. So the wrapper for this is, of course, a Florida Sun-Grown, grown by Jeff B's farm in Claremont, Florida. And the binder is Connecticut Broadleaf, grown by John Foster in South Windsor, Connecticut. The filler is Pennsylvania Type 41, grown by the Mennonite family farmers in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut Havana, grown by John Foster in South Windsor, Connecticut. So those are the specs. It is the Toro size, 6x52. And it goes on to say, from the cigar molds to the bands to the hardwood in the cabinet boxes, the American is a 100% American cigar. In keeping with our commitment to transparency, we proudly showcase all of our American partners below. And they do. They talk about the wrappers, Florida Sun-Grown, and how Jeff B., the owner of Corona Cigar Company, sought to revive the tradition by establishing a 20-acre farm in Claremont, Florida, where he grows his famous Florida Sun-Grown tobacco and a Corojo 99 seed plant. Jeff's farm is the closest one to Cuba and its warm, humid climate and mineral-rich soils give the tobacco a unique, earthy taste. The American is the only cigar with Florida sun-grown wrapper. Now, that was true up until after Drew Estate has a Florida sun-grown wrapper cigar, and I believe Davidoff did an exclusive cigar with Corona cigars, and produced a cigar with a Florida sun-grown. It was very exclusive, I believe. This is the Drew Estate one that is called FSG by Drew Estate, and it uses the Florida sun-grown wrapper. So, but at the time it was, and this is Drew Newman's baby. He's the one that worked with Jeff B from Corona Cigars to make this happen, and of course, without J.C. Newman, this would not have evolved. Now, the binder tobacco from the Connecticut broadleaf, in the late 1700s, John Foster's great-grandfather began farming land in South Windsor, Connecticut. 7 generations and more than 200 years later, the Foster farm continues to grow pumpkins, corn, and premium cigar tobacco on 150 acres of rich, fertile soil in the Connecticut River Valley. John is one of the premier growers of the famed Connecticut broadleaf tobacco, which is used as the binder for the American. Now, when we talk about the filler tobacco for this cigar, we're going to go to the Pennsylvania Amish. In the mid-1700s, the Amish settled in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and shortly thereafter began growing tobacco for cigars. It was here where the term stogie was coined, named after the legendary Conestoga wagons that carried settlers west in the 1800s, and their drivers, who smoked long, strong cigars rolled with fresh Lancaster tobaccos. Today, Amish families continue this tobacco growing tradition and spend their summers in the fields growing and harvesting their famous cigar tobaccos. The American's filler includes a blend of Pennsylvania Amish tobaccos, and it includes also Connecticut Havana. In addition to that Connecticut broadleaf tobacco, John Foster is also the exclusive grower of the Connecticut Havana seed tobacco. This heirloom seed was formerly grown in the Connecticut River Valley decades ago, but fell out of favor and stopped being planted until Foster Farms resurrected it a decade ago. This special aged tobacco is used as the wrapper for J.C. Newman's Diamond Crown Black Diamond, and is also blended in the filler of the American to enhance the complexity of its flavor profile. And then it jots down a little information on the Millennium Wood Box, which is family-owned business founded by Miguel Cabrera. Miguel and his team handcraft the American cigar boxes in Miami using basswood that is sustainably and responsibly grown in America. And now basswood, if you remember, was one of these woods where, when I talked about the creation of the humidor, the invention of the humidor as we know it now, basswood was one of those alternative woods that was considered quite appropriate for making humidors, and was indeed used as a humidor, for humidor wood. So it goes back to the manufacturer here. Founded in 1895 by Julius Caesar Newman, J.C. Newman Cigar Company is the oldest family-owned premium cigar maker in America. For 4 generations and 125 years, J.C. Newman has been handcrafting many of the world's finest cigars. J.C. Newman is headquartered in an iconic 110-year-old cigar factory in Ybor City, National Historic Landmark District in Tampa, Florida. At this factory, known as El Reloj, J.C. Newman rolls premium cigars by hand and by hand-operated antique cigar machines. And it goes on to talk a little bit more about some of their brands and a little bit more about J.C. Newman's history, which, as we know, is quite extensive. So this is actually going to be a 4-part series. America's That Special. It deserves a 4-part series. And this first part is going to deal with the American itself, but we're going to touch base on other cigars that are also American Puros. That's right, I narrowed it down to 4 cigars that are currently American Puros. But this is the first one that I'm going to smoke today in honor of the 4th of July and in honor of America and in honor of its rich, deep tobacco culture and history. But the prototype for this cigar must be noted, and that is the Corona All-American FSG Experimentals. This is the prototype that Jeff B. from Corona Cigars worked on with Drew Newman in order to produce this cigar. Now, they're very similar. We'll get into the differences when I review this cigar. The main difference in terms of the specs really is in the binder. This has a double binder. We'll get into that when we review this cigar. But this is the prototype. So this would be, actually, was the first American Puro. Not in the history of America. There were American Puros in the 1800s and up until the early 1900s. But in our present modern day time, this was the first one that was resurrected. Then you had the American Toro. Corona Cigars also produced something called the FSG Farm Roll, which is not just an American Puro, it's a Florida Puro. That's right. This is all Florida tobacco, but it still qualifies as an American Puro. The 4th cigar, which I narrowed down, is called the American Label, and it is a cigar.com exclusive. And we'll talk about this cigar as well. Okay, honorable mention to CAO for producing the CAO America, but the CAO America, of course, is not an American Puro. Nonetheless, it is very Americanesque in the fact that I do believe it does use some American tobacco, but it is a mixed blend, and it does have a very American label. So honorable mention to CAO. I won't be reviewing this as a part of the 4-part series, but I thought I should mention this cigar because of its American qualities. So now that I've mentioned all of those things, I am going to take a moment to clip and light this and get on with this information. Now, we've returned now, and I've got to tell you, very excited to be smoking an American Puro. We're talking about the type of cigar that was, at one point, what Americans relied on heavily when they couldn't afford the imported cigars coming from Cuba or from England. And there was a push to expand American tobacco from as early as the 1600s. I mean, if we want to go back in history, I have notes here that indicate that Pocahontas married John Rolfe, April 5th, 1614. And at that time, Rolfe begins to experiment on a Virginia farm with tobacco of the Rustica variety. Now, at the time, North American tobacco was not very pleasant. Not as pleasant as the southern variety and the Spanish tobacco species that they were exporting. But Rolfe introduced the southern tobacco to the Jamestown community, even though it was a crime to do so. So he got these seeds and he introduced them to the northern folk, and in doing so, it set off a domino effect. Now, oral tradition states that he learned Powhatan curing methods from Pocahontas, hanging the tobacco to dry rather than laying it on the ground, amongst other things he learned. It was beginning to be sold to London, and everyone starts to grow it, thus a demand, and Rolfe's tobacco creates a demand that needs an increase in labor and drives the need for slavery. Now, that is one aspect of cigar tobacco history that we've heard about, and that is mostly associated when we think of American tobacco. But today we're not going to dwell on that so much, because we're going to touch base more on what became of an American Puro. And we know that there are some dark aspects to the American culture of tobacco, but there are also some incredibly great things that came about because of American tobacco. And we can't ignore those things either. And I'm not going to get political here. I'm just going to say to you, this is a review about American tobacco for its use in premium cigars, or an American Puro as it was known back in the 1800s, because they didn't have that word, premium cigar. It was just a cigar. Today we look at it as, oh, well, that's a premium cigar. Back then, no one cared about that word. So we're going to talk about that. And the first article that we have is from the American Mercury, dated May 1924. And it was 50 cents for a copy, 5 years for the subscription, and it was a monthly review. And Carl Avery Werner writes an article by the name of The American Cigar. Appropriate for this review, I think. It's very distinct. What I'm getting right now, very distinct, very different, but I am familiar with some of these tobaccos, as most of you are. That's right, we are familiar with them, because lately we've been seeing more use of Pennsylvania tobacco. We've already been years now in experiencing the Connecticut broadleaf, from Drew Estate to other companies that have been employing that for cigar wrapper and binder. And in this cigar, I'm experiencing that flavor that I'm used to in a lot of cigars that, of course, use it. So it's not completely unknown. And it won't be to you if you try this cigar. But the difference is, of course, there is no Central American tobacco in here. There is no Caribbean tobacco in here. It's only American tobacco. Isn't that a beautiful thing? Look, we've talked about Puro pride, and the pride that nations and island nations and that even states have about rolling something or producing something made completely within those borders. In relation to cigars, we consider them Puro cigars, but it could be any product. It could be a car. It could be a piece of clothing. There is a sense of pride when you make something completely in that area. It's a source of local pride. And in this case, it's a pride, it's a country pride. It started off a medium plus, actually, very leathery aspect to it. But let's get to this article. What has become of the American cigars of yesterday? Scorning the easy answer of the facetious that they have gone up in smoke, the old-time devotee demands more detailed news of their fate. He recalls the reminiscent glow, the soul-satisfying 5-center, the after-dinner 3 for a quarter, and the luxurious Sunday 10 cents straight out of 30 years ago, and he laments the apparent fact that they are not obtainable today. What caused them to disappear? Now, this is 1924, and they're talking about cigars made in America, completely of American tobacco, that 30 years ago were readily available, and now they're not. 1920s, baby. The true reply is that they have not disappeared at all, that the cigars of today are just as good as those of 30 years ago. There have been, to be sure, some changes in what might be termed cigar fashions, but in the main, it is the price, not the quality of the tobacco, that has changed. The immortal nickel cigar of the last generation still exists, but one must now pay for it at the rate of 2 for 15 cents, or perhaps 10 cents straight. One may still enjoy two of the old-time 3 for a quarter, but now one must pay for it at the rate of 2 for 25 cents. Prices go up. That's what happens, right? So then he goes on to say, shade-grown Connecticut cut, Java wrappers, Florida wrappers and fillers, and Puerto Rico tobacco, all entering largely into the popular smokes of today, were practically unknown in youth to men who are now on the shady side of 50. Our fathers liked their cigars extremely dark. We of today want them almost straw-colored. Up to a few years ago, most American smokers preferred cigars slender and not much bigger than a man's finger. Now they're exaggerating there, of course, but you get the idea. Now, particularly in the large cities, they want them fat and long. 40 years ago, 9 out of 10 smokers demanded what they called a strong cigar. Now the cry is for very mild cigars. Up to a little over a century ago, cigar making was an unknown art in this country. Cuba was then the cigar making country par excellence, with the Philippines and Puerto Rico in second and third places respectively. The relatively few cigars consumed by Americans came almost exclusively from Havana tobaccos. Grown in what is now the United States were regarded Tobaccos grown in what is now the United States were regarded as suitable only for smoking in pipes or for chewing. But during the half century between 1810 and 1860, the practice of making cigars, either partly or entirely of American-grown tobaccos, slowly arose. The tobacco grown in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin was found, by experiment, to be suitable for cigar purposes. And it gradually developed into types entirely distinct from the tobacco of Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, and Kentucky, which continued and continues today to be used for chewing and in the pipe and for making cigarettes. Before the Civil War, American cigars had resolved themselves into two trade classes: the imported and the domestic. Imported meaning made in Havana, wholly of Cuban tobacco, and domestic meaning cigars made in this country, wholly of American tobacco. Then cigar factories began to be opened in Key West, Florida, by Spaniards and Cubans who came across from Havana, bringing back with them their Cuban tobacco, Cuban workers, and Cuban traditions. This added another type, which came to be known as the Key West cigar. It was precisely the same as the Havana cigar, except in the matter of geography. The Key West industry soon spread to Tampa, Florida, and because of the better shipping facilities there, Tampa eventually far outgrew the original cigar colony of the Keys. Meanwhile, also, some of the American manufacturers in the North began to import Havana tobacco and to use it in combination with domestic leaf to add to the fragrance and palatability of the domestic product. This brings us to about the time that our daddies began to smoke. The matter of choice presented no difficulty to them. If they called for an imported cigar, they got one. If they called for a Key Wester, they were given one in every respect like an imported cigar, but made either in Key West or in Tampa. If they asked for a domestic cigar, they were given for 5 cents a cigar made entirely of domestic tobacco or having a filler of Havana scraps. Or for 10 cents, a cigar with Havana tobacco on the inside encased in a binder or jacket of Connecticut or Wisconsin tobacco, and a wrapper of Connecticut tobacco. They were the three distinct varieties: imported, Key West, and domestic, and whatever they were brought or under whatever label, they ran fairly uniform and true to type. It's that leathery aspect is kind of fading away. A little sweetness with the sweetness in the finish. So far, it's burning very well and it's tasting very good. The next step in cigar evolution, dating back about 40 years, came after Key West had divided honors with Tampa, and when at both places there began to be manufactured cigars which deviated from the strictly Cuban type. In them were introduced in small or great degree domestic tobaccos from the north. The result was that the terms Key West and Tampa lost their original significance. And although they continued to suggest cigars of good quality, then the term clear Havana was invented to designate a cigar containing nothing but Havana tobacco wherever made. There you go. Now that term, clear Havana, has slightly different definitions depending on whether you read about the clear Havana meaning in the 1920s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. But generally, it involves Havana tobacco. Not generally, it always involves Havana tobacco, but you get the idea. Also, about the same time, it was discovered that on the island of Sumatra, a Dutch possession in the East Indies, there was produced a kind of tobacco peculiarly adapted for use as cigar wrappers. Enterprising American manufacturers of so-called domestic cigars began importing it for use in place of the coarser domestic wrapper. I guess they're referring to the Connecticut broadleaf there. Its attractive color, silky and elastic texture, marvelous thinness, and free-burning qualities made it extremely desirable, and so manufacturers brought in spite of the duty, then $2 a pound. The quick popularity of this Sumatra tobacco inspired the idea for improving the cultivation of wrapper leaf in New England, Florida, and Georgia, with the result that another new type was soon evolved in Connecticut, known as the shade-grown wrapper. This tobacco is cultivated under artificial shade, which enables it to ripen slowly into leaves that are very thin, of fine grain, and of large size. The cigars of Puerto Rico and the Philippines, with the exception of the old-fashioned Manila cheroot, now almost extinct, had no place in the cosmos of the American smoker until after the Spanish-American War. But since 1900, the leaf tobacco of Puerto Rico and cigars of the Philippines have been slowly but steadily increasing in popularity. And now the former is in very great demand. The quantity of tobacco of all types used annually by American cigar factories is about 150 million pounds. The yearly imports of Puerto Rico leaf approximate 16 million pounds, or more than 17% of the total. Indeed, quite as interesting as trailing the cigars of yesterday is the mystery of what has become of our cigar smokers. For with our steadily growing population, the national cigar output ought naturally to have doubled itself since 1890. Obviously, the new generation is smoking not cigars, but cigarettes. But why? The answer is first, that cigarettes, far more than cigars, have had the benefit of heavy national advertising. And second, that the mildness, cheapness, and convenience of tobacco in cigarette form have suited the fancy and fitted the purse of the young, and particularly of the female young. Smoking by women has considerably increased the consumption of cigarettes. It has increased the consumption of cigars not at all. What are you looking to blame it on women for? It's not their fault. It's not their fault. Men shamed them for smoking cigars, so they gravitated to a more, at the time, considered daintier cigarette. And it was easier for them to get this at grocery stores or pharmacies in a small box, which was inconspicuous and could be put away. And it was a quick smoke, so they could smoke their tobacco cigarette quickly, dispose of it, and on with their business. But that's not a woman's fault, mind you. a lot of people were smoking cigarettes in the 1920s. It wasn't just women. We know this. So, the article continues. And I'm leaving out certain things that are not relevant to what we're talking about right now, and also to cut down on time. But the cigar that the old-time smoker called a Key West is now known in the trade as a handmade clear Havana. Every cigar dealer carries at least one brand of such clear Havanas, usually in several sizes. If the smoker has reason to doubt the intelligence or sincerity of his tobacconist, he can play safe by demanding a bonded clear Havana. It's a medium to a medium plus. Some leathery notes, some woody notes, some cedar, some sweetness, some bitterness. There's a strong earthy tobacco flavor coming off of this cigar that is very distinct. I will tell you that. But it is good. It is good. Moving right along. The cigars of Puerto Rico were in fashion, and so were the Philippines. At the time, these were colonies of the United States. And later, at a certain point in time, tobacco coming from Puerto Rico and the Philippines would be considered domestic, despite the fact that they were not states. And of course, as we know, the Philippines is independent now, and Puerto Rico is still a Commonwealth colony. So, on page 30 of the American Mercury in 1924, the writer goes on to state, "We now come to the fancier of the old-time domestic cigar. Here the trail becomes faint and a bit confusing. For it is in this division that the most marked transformation has taken place since your son's wife's father smoked his first cigar. Along with Sumatra and old-fashioned Connecticut wrappers, there are now also employed Connecticut shade-grown, Florida shade-grown, and Java wrappers. And instead of only domestic and Havana filler, there are now those vast quantities of Puerto Rico to be reckoned with. That old-time cigar lover who regards himself as a smoker of the domestic article may be tickling his palate with cigars actually manufactured in Puerto Rico, of which there are 156 million consumed in this country annually, or with Manila cigars, of which we consume 250 million. So he must need to be technical and exact when he states his requirements to his dealer. If he wants the nickel cigar of 25 years ago, he must call for a cigar with a Sumatra or Connecticut wrapper and a long filler consisting of old Ohio tobacco or Havana scraps, or both in combination. But the best advice that can be given to the veteran connoisseur is that he divest himself of his memories of the days that are gone and adjust himself to the cigar fashions that now prevail. The trend which cigar character and quality are taking is as much due to the change in the preferences of the new generation of smokers as it is to conditions in the industry. For instance, the increasing importance of shade-grown Connecticut is largely attributable to the prevalent liking for light-color cigars. Nature intended that cigar leaf tobacco, after going through the cure, should be predominantly of rich nut brown color. Rich nut brown color, perhaps. Now he goes on to say that it was tobacco's habit to produce a very small proportion of lighter shades. But there came a time when these few leaves of extreme light color, which were really perversions of natural development, began to catch the fancy of cigar consumers. They began to insist that the jackets encasing their cigars be very thin in texture and very light in color. That demand marked the birth of tobacco growing in Connecticut and Florida under tents of cheesecloth. But even now, with this process, which is exceedingly costly, at the height of development, the soil can be dissuaded from its natural bent only to a limited degree. The consequence is that the manufacturer has to pay a very high price for extremely light wrapper tobaccos in order that the grower, taking into account his relatively unsaleable dark tobaccos at the expense of artificial shade, may get a profit. So, darker cigars were the thing during the time that individuals like former president, and the General Grant smoked cigars, and then now in the 1920s, there's this need for American shade tobacco, Connecticut shade tobacco, precisely. If it were not for this light-colored craze, cigars would be produced more cheaply. And also, they would probably taste more like they used to. What is to be done, right? First world problems. There is a common impression that a dark cigar is always strong. This is not the case. In the first place, dark tobacco leaf is not necessarily any stronger than tobacco leaf of lighter color. It is only mellower and more mature. Probably there are many grandfathers today who will remember when their chief problem was to get cigars dark enough to suit them, when they looked for the word oscuro on the end of the box. Now, oscuro, translates to dark, is quite obsolete in cigar terminology. It has been abandoned as a color mark, and the oscuro tobaccos have been relegated to the filler and binder grades, where the color line is not drawn. Smoothed out bit, getting some sweetness and earthiness, light cedar hints. It's a very earthy tobacco, very earthy cigar. It's medium to a medium plus. It's full flavored. Good aroma. Very enjoyable so far. Okay. I have referred to the trend of consumer demand toward larger cigars. This is a fact not only manifested to the casual observer, but established by the records of the Internal Revenue Bureau. Examination of the latter reveals that in 1910, 20 pounds was the average quantity of leaf tobacco used to make 1,000 cigars. And in 1920, the average quantity was over 23 pounds, and 60% of the total production of cigars were so large that they required 25 pounds to make the 1,000. It is one of the curious inconsistencies of cigar smoking psychology that devotees are now demanding that cigars be milder and at the same time considerably larger. Someone has figured out that the additional quantity of tobacco representing the difference between the average size cigar of 1910 and the average size cigar of 1920 would make 1 billion cigars a year. I'm no math genius, but that's a lot of cigars. Excellent taste. Excellent, very earthy. Not much of pepper going on here. You're not going to get a lot of spiciness or peppery notes. It's mild pepper at best. It's more sweetness and earthiness that I'm getting in this cigar. But I'll continue with this article so we can wrap it up. While, as I have said, the character of many American cigars has undergone some change on account of the introduction of types of tobacco that were not formerly known, the process of manufacture remains today almost exactly as they were 25 years ago. It would be interesting to every cigar smoker to know that the exact type of tobacco of which the cigars he most favors are composed, but under prevailing conditions he can do no more than ask the man and take the latter's word for it. Of course, all genuine, imported, and American-made clear Havana cigars are made only of Havana tobaccos, and Puerto Rico and Manila cigars are entirely made of Puerto Rico, and Philippine tobaccos, respectively. But these constitute only a small percentage of our total consumption. The average so-called domestic, or as the trade terms its seed and Havana cigar, retailing at from 10 to 20 cents, is likely to have either a Sumatra or a Java or a shade-grown Connecticut wrapper and a Wisconsin or Connecticut binder. If it sells at as much as 15 cents, the filler is probably all Havana. Under 15 cents and down to 9 cents, the same wrapper is used, and the cigar may still have a long Havana filler, but probably the filler will be a blend of Havana and domestic, or Havana and Puerto Rico, or Puerto Rico and domestic, or long domestic in combination with Havana scraps, or all Havana scraps, or all domestic filler, such as Ohio, Pennsylvania, or Connecticut. You follow that? That's a lot of different combinations. But the gist of it is that these categories were being divided for a reason, to give the smoker options, because he now didn't have access to the all-American cigar, the American Puro. The truth is that while they cost more, cigars today are just as good as they were 25 years ago. With 30% greater population and vastly more money in the country, there are fewer imported and all Havana cigars smoked now than then. Some maintain that it is because Havana tobacco is not as good as it used to be. I do not think that that is true. I doubt that Havana tobacco, or Puerto Rico, or Ohio, or Pennsylvania, for that matter, has changed appreciably one way or the other since we were boys. The expression, a good cigar, is in fact more or less meaningless. So far as the consumer is concerned, a good cigar is the cigar he likes. From the manufacturer's viewpoint, a good cigar is one that sells readily and seems to give satisfaction. I believe that if the smokers of today were less prone to smoke with their eyes, and if they were influenced only by the senses of the nose and the palate, and so accepted cigars of darker color and smaller size, cigar making and smoking would be more pleasant than it is, and cigar smokers would vastly increase in number. There you have it. There you have it. History of the American cigar is vast, and we could sit here and talk all day about it. But I'm going to finish this American Puro, which is greatly pleasing me. It's earthy, like I said before, and that's the key note here. Earthiness, cedar notes, wood notes, sweetness, mild pepper. Excellently done, beautifully done. And so far, I haven't had many issues with the burn line, although I'm developing one now. And I will have to touch it up. But other than that, the draw has been... It was beginning to be a conservative draw. It opened up. It's a medium pace draw. And it's a pleasant cigar. Now, for those of you asking, what does it cost? Well, if you go on Corona or Neptune, you're going to see this price somewhere between $12 and $15, depending on the Vitola size. I think for the experience of smoking an American Puro, it's worth the price. Even if you just try it once and see if it fits your flavor profile, if it's to your liking. If you like earthy cigars, obviously you're going to jump on board with this one right away, and you're going to love it from the get. I like earthy cigars, but I also like a little dose of pepper and sweetness. I'm missing that pepper a little bit because, why? We're so used to smoking blends with Nicaragua and Honduras that we've become accustomed to that flavor profile. And for those of us that smoke mainly Dominican cigars, whether it be Davidoff or just blends that incorporate the blending of Dominican and Nicaraguan tobaccos, we get a little bit of both, right? We get a little bit of that balance of the sweetness of the Dominican tobacco and some of the spiciness and strength of the Nicaraguan tobacco. But in this cigar, what you're getting is American made, done right. Thank you for watching the first part of the American Puro series, The American Cigar by J.C. Newman, and a collaboration with Corona Cigars. Thank you for watching. Till next time on Backyard Cigars.